What was your dream, Frasier?
Oh, all right. Starts out in a seedy motel room. I'm naked.
Interesting.
Yes, well, then the shower turns off, and out from the bathroom steps a man. All right, go ahead, let me have it.
Are you saying that now, or is that a quote from the dream?
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And today, we are diving into the depths of the subconscious. What are we talking about today, Amy?
Today's episode is all about dreams.
Yeah, we're doing dream episodes. Lots. Yeah, well, those are more for fantasy daydreams, I feel like, is when we get the wavy.
It's more like dream sequency.
But
this is actually all of our characters fall asleep.
Yes.
And have a dream.
These are proper nocturnal dreams. What are the episodes we're doing?
All right, so we're going to start with Punky Brewster, Season 1, Episode 17, My Aged Valentine. And then Growing Pains, Season 3, Episode 10, This Is Your Life. Who's the Boss, Season 6, Episode 3, In Your Dreams. And Frasier, Season 4, Episode 3, The Impossible Dream. A lot of references here in the titles.
You're not going to make, I mean, it's just because there are so many titles of things that involve dreams that it's like they can't resist. But so let me ask you, what is your deal with dreams? Are you somebody that has a lot of vivid dreams? Do you analyze your dreams? Are you someone that looks for the meanings like Frasier? What are we dealing with here?
So I do dream. Like, I am a person who sort of remembers my dreams, but I think like a lot of people, you know, I won't remember like right away when I wake up. Usually it's something will remind me later on in the day and they'll be like, oh yeah, I had a dream about that. Every now and then, if I have something a little bit more disturbing of a dream, like we're going to see with Frasier, where it was like bothering him because he couldn't figure out what the deal was, then I will do the thing of like, what are some of the symbols that I remember from this dream that I could kind of look up on some sort of dream dictionary and see if I can connect to something in my real life to see what is the subconscious stress that I'm trying to work out while I'm sleeping.
Yeah, I've never really bought into, for myself anyway, that sort of thing of like, well, a cat symbolizes wealth, but a dog symbolizes danger, like this sort of one-to-one thing. I currently don't dream very much at all in ways that I remember, but historically I would have a lot of vivid dreams, almost always bad, all anxiety, nightmare dreams. Very familiar with the I have to go on stage, but I didn't learn my lines type dreams. Lots of the bombs are falling type dreams. Lots of driving on a windy cliff type things. All of your sort of standard.
Very stressful.
Yeah, and I never look into like, well, what could that mean? To me, it's obvious. I'm just stressed out. I'm an anxious person. I have dreams of danger and peril, and that's just the way it is.
It's very clear.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll see how it plays out with these different characters. But this is one I've been looking forward to for a long time because in various different ways, as we'll see, sitcoms tend to have fun with dream sequences.
Yes.
It's an excuse to do things that you can't do in real life.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into it. We're starting with Punky Brewster, first time on the pod. What's your history with Punky?
Oh, I love Punky Brewster. I was very shocked to hear that she was in third grade. For some reason, I had in my head that Punky and I were the same age and that she saw that Challenger disaster episode that they did that was later in the series. she watched that in her kindergarten class, just like I watched it in my kindergarten class. But that is a total false memory. It was a couple seasons after this, like season 3 or something, 2 maybe, at the very end. And so she was in 3rd or 4th grade. But she's such a tiny child actress that I just always had her kind of pegged as younger, I guess.
Yeah, I was not into this as a kid. This was one of those shows just like from this bizarro alternate universe where I would go over to a friend's house and they would be watching Punky Brewster. And I was like, oh, this is nice. I'd never heard of it. Like never saw the commercials. It's like we must have just not been on that channel or something.
And it was for girls. I mean, it was for kids, but like it's all about punky power.
Yes, there's a little bit of a Little Orphan Annie, Pippi Longstocking kind of thing going on here. But yeah, I would hear that name and I thought of it as almost like a Pee Wee Herman type thing where I didn't understand that this was just a TV sitcom character. I kind of thought Punky Brewster, like, who is that? Is this like a person, like a figure in our culture? Like, I just didn't ever really understand what the deal was with her. Now that I've seen the show, I want to ask, boy, were we obsessed in the 80s with the thing of being adopted by a rich family, right? Like you just see that Reagan era mentality on full display where it's like, wouldn't it be so cool to be rich? We don't want to have a show all about rich people because they're snobs and we can't relate to them. We need to have all of our shows be about normal everyday people like you and me that somehow ended up living in the world of the Manhattan upper crust, you know?
Oh, that's interesting. And that, you may be getting that impression because it's a sitcom. And so they're in Chicago and the apartment is palatial, even though we know that's not how people live in big cities. But there is an ongoing thing throughout many seasons. Henry is not wealthy. Henry is kind of a struggling photographer. And so if you don't know Punky Brewster, Henry is the older gentleman who is, I would say late 50s, 60s.
He's her Mr. Drummond.
Yeah, he's like a grandpa age, who adopted her because, and it takes multiple seasons before that actually happens because the state doesn't want him to be a foster parent because he doesn't make enough money. They live in kind of this rundown building the way he found Punky in the first place. So Punky's backstory is her father deserts their family and then her mother abandons her in a shopping mall. And so she wanders around the shopping mall or the grocery store or whatever and with her dog Brandon, and then eventually wanders into this apartment building where she finds a vacant apartment and is living there on her own. And then she's discovered by Henry and Cherry's grandmother in turn, and they realize that she's living alone in this apartment and that she's been abandoned. And so then there's all the back and forth with the foster system, and she gets sent to an orphanage. She gets sent back to that children's home multiple times throughout the series when Henry at one point in the series gets sick.
Right.
So that's interesting though that you would say like, oh, the rich people adopted her.
Yes, it is. And now that you say that, I look back on it and go, okay, I guess I was projecting that. The reason why I say that is mostly because this Henry character, maybe he's not a rich man. I remarked he looks like Charlton Heston. He has this like sort of old proper man kind of way.
Yeah,
about
he has
him.
almost the Frasier voice.
Yes,
like he is a little bit
continental.
English. Yeah, he's a
yeah,
little bit English.
Absolutely. So okay, it makes sense that they're not wealthy per se. I have to say, I had assumed that the backstory was her parents were dead, a la Different Strokes or Webster. What you just said is somehow darker than that.
And the show uses its that backstory and just the fact that they're like working class to kind of, they exploit that for many opportunities to teach lessons. This is a show very much meant for kids. It's all about teaching lessons. Like this episode we're going to watch is very much about consent, and it's 1985. Like, who was talking about consent in 1985?
Yeah, I think that's debatable. It touches on the issue of consent, but the way it deals with it is a little... I'll just say it's interesting from a 2023 standpoint.
Yeah, but it's also the kind of way that you would deal with it with children, right?
Yeah. So going into this particular episode, like you said, it starts out with a lot of stuff in the school, and it is surreal. The whole tone of this show is a little odd. There's music playing, I noticed. There's this weird music bed playing underneath the scenes, which is very unusual for the sitcom form and kind of distracting. And yeah, you remarked, why do they have lockers? That's true. But to me, the larger point was, why are all of these kids milling around a hallway as though they're like in a free period in high school? These are like 7, 8-year-old kids, and they're all standing around this hallway like it's Saved by the Bell.
Right.
You know, various adults are coming through, chatting with them and continuing to walk. I'm like, don't these kids have anywhere to be?
Right. There's very, like in third grade, there's not a lot of passing time between classes, and generally you're walked from place to place by your teacher. When I worked in Amsterdam, the kids would, from third grade up, or end of second grade up, I guess, were allowed to walk themselves to recess or to lunch and then walk back. But it wasn't this like hanging out in the hallway.
They didn't stand there and dish for like 10 minutes, you know, outside of Mrs. Henderson's classroom or something.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe they did. And when they finished lunch, they were just like hanging out.
And it gets even stranger when we get into their conversation. It's little Punky and her two friends, Sherry and Margot. The whole story is that her friend, her fellow third grader, is like, you're nobody if you don't have a boyfriend.
In this first scene, she's annoyed because she's been standing there for this random, weird, 10 minutes of passing time between third grade classes. And all the kids is all they're talking about. It's Valentine's Day. And the teacher loves Valentine's Day. It's her favorite holiday and she can't wait for it. And then all the kids are so excited. And they're all talking about how, like, even the boys, like the three little boys that are also like part of their crew or whatever, are so excited. And so the kids are all paired up. Sherry is with Alan and Margot's with whatever that guy's name is. And they're like, making goo-goo eyes over each other and talking about all these fancy Valentines they're going to give each other the next day when they do their Valentine exchange. And everyone's saying to Punky, "Oh, aren't you excited about Valentine's Day?" And she says, "No, I'm not. I'm not interested in that. I'm not, like, I'm fine." And the girls just can't believe it. They're like, "What do you mean? If you don't want a boyfriend, you're going to end up alone." And that sort of sets the tone for the whole episode.
Yeah, it's one of these, what would be a pretty standard storyline if this were about like women in their 30s or something. It's just the standard,
or teenagers. Like, you could see teenagers having that conversation.
But even then, I would be making the remark like, sure, it might feel like that, but it's pretty silly to think you're going to be alone forever just because you don't have a boyfriend now. It's absolutely ludicrous when you're talking about third graders. But yeah, there is a pretty big plot twist involving a guest appearance by Ricky Schroeder.
Yeah, from Silver Spoons, which aired, kind of at the same time. So Punky Brewster and Silver Spoons were these right after football game shows on Sunday night. And I guess Silver Spoons also was like a Saturday morning thing at some point too. So anyway, they were both NBC shows, and Ricky Schroeder is the love interest for Punky. And so he comes up and, all the girls, Margot and Sherry, are saying to Punky, are you going to give whatever that kid's name is a Valentine, or, maybe he'll give you a Valentine. Won't that be special? Because, he really likes you and everything. And Punky's, not having it. And then he comes over and starts flirting with Punky, which is the most awkward thing ever. First of all, like I said, she's tiny. She's tinier than all of her friends, and he's taller than all of her friends. So he looks like this 6th grader who's hitting on this 2nd grader. It's very weird.
None of this bears any resemblance to behavior that I have ever seen or remember from kids this age.
No,
like,
not
again,
at all.
This is like
it's
taking a script from Beverly Hills 90210 and handing it to these 8-year-olds and being like, read this.
Yes. So they go through this thing, and Punky's saying, "I'm not interested in being your Valentine or giving you a Valentine or making goo-goo eyes at you or any of those things." And then he sneaks in a kiss, and he kissed her on the cheek, right? He sneaks in a kiss and she decks him. And then the next scene, they're in the principal's office and they've both gotten in trouble. And Henry comes to pick Punky up, and the teacher is also there. And then Ricky Schroeder comes out of the principal's office having gotten his punishment, and he says, Punky, the principal said I had to apologize. And she says, and this was the part I was like, all right, way to go, 1985 television, teaching all of us about consent. She says, you're my friend, but you're not my boyfriend. I don't want a boyfriend. And if you want something about like, if you want that or whatever, you have to ask before you kiss me. You can't just kiss me. And I was like, yeah, Punky.
Yeah, definitely. Henry shows up, her foster dad, and his wording cracked me up. He goes, is it true that you blackened a boy's eye? Right. That's his reaction. But yeah, you're applauding the focus on consent and everything. To me, there was something a little off about the way, he goes, well, what she says is he kissed me with his lips, right? And
so when she's explaining it to Henry.
Yeah. And Henry says, well, that was very wrong. He shouldn't have done that, but you shouldn't have punched him and you still need to be punished. And what he's saying is totally fine. Like, he's saying two wrongs don't make a right, but there's something about the way that it's played that is just a little flipped from the way it would be now, I think. Whereas now it would be like, sure, she shouldn't punch him. We'll have to deal with that. But we really need to talk about the fact that this boy kissed her. Like, that's what would really be the emphasis. And back then, it seems like it's the opposite.
No,
it's like, of course he can't
handled
kiss you.
They handled it in a more flat, like we're not bringing this to the oh my goodness kind of level. Whereas I can completely agree with you that if this happened in a school nowadays with kids this young, that boy would not be coming to school the next day. And unfortunately, I don't know that that's the right message either. Yeah. Right. The way that they handled this, where when Henry says, you still have to be punished, the teacher Punky says, oh, I have to bang erasers after school for the next week. And he says, well, I think that's enough of a punishment then. So he's not going to punish her anymore at home. There is no like, you're in huge trouble for punching this boy. It was, you did what you needed to do or you felt like you needed to do in the moment to defend yourself. You shouldn't do that. You need to bang erasers, but that's enough of a punishment, right? And then the boy comes back out, and this is the part that was like, come on, this is why it's 1980s television, right? So Ricky Schroeder comes back out. They have this great conversation. Punky's like, I'm your friend, not your, I don't want you to be my boyfriend, blah, 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 blah. And then the little fucker leans in to kiss her again, and she goes to slug him again, and they pull the two of them apart.
Yeah. He goes, so Punky, you want to kiss and make up? And I wrote, this kid is cruising for a bruising. Because first time, that's on her. But after that, come on. You can't, you mess with the bull. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, exactly. So somebody needs to have a talk with his dad about teaching him that when girls say no, they mean no, not try again.
Right. But we sort of leave that aspect of it. What we're focusing on now is the fact that after all of this melee, Punky is still obsessed with the idea that if she doesn't plan for the high school prom, as her friend puts it, right? Because that's the end goal of all of this, right? That's their nest egg that they're planning for, is the high school prom.
High school prom is 10 years away. You have to plan for it now.
Yeah. So her friend Margot puts it in Punky's head that if she doesn't have a boyfriend now, she's going to be alone forever. She's not going to have a date to the high school prom. She's going to end up living with Henry, her foster dad, as just a couple of spinsters, basically.
Right. And actually they're back at Punky's house, and they are having a play date, and they're making their Valentines. And the girls, Sherry and Margot, are making Valentines for their boyfriends, and Punky is making a Valentine for Henry, because what she keeps saying to the girls every time they say you need a boyfriend is, I've got Henry. He's the person that I love, and I've got Brandon, my dog. That's all the family, all the love I need. I'm happy. I don't need any more. Boys are gross. She says at the end of the episode, I run faster, spit farther, like all these things. She's like, what do I need a boy for? And she really kind of pushes that narrative throughout the entire play date with her friends. And it doesn't seem like it super affected her until she goes to bed that night. And she's having a hard time going to sleep because she's thinking about this idea that her friends keep saying she's going to be old and alone, but she thinks she'll be fine if she has Henry, and she can't marry the two together.
Right. And so the dream is going to be her projection of what if that's true? What if I end up old and all alone and I'm still here living with Henry? And so we get...
And she doesn't think of it as all alone. This is what she wants. She is happy. She's old and she's with Henry, and he's even older. And they have Brandon, who's super old as well. And they're living their lives. Henry's 140.
Well, yeah, this begins with a shot of the dog, Brandon, with glasses and like an old lady wig on. Or
and like an
kind of
extra beard. He looks kind of like a lion because he's a golden retriever. Yeah. So you put a wig kind of beard shape wig on him. He looks like a lion.
Yeah, but it's a pretty funny sight gag, and it lets you know immediately, all right, like that's what we're dealing with here. This is going to be a skit, right? This is the same exact thing they did in Saved by the Bell. I think they do this on The Fresh Prince. It's one of your go-to fantasy things, right? Let's make them old. Wouldn't it be funny if they're old?
We get to do all the physical comedy with everybody who is a child acting old.
They really go for it. This isn't just like, 19-year-old Will Smith putting on a, funny wig and a cane or something. These are all three of the little kid characters in like really extensive prosthetics and wigs and
old age makeup.
Yeah. They really transform them to the point I said they look like characters out of like Labyrinth or The Dark Crystal or something. Like they're really extreme.
Yeah. The makeup on Punky is wild. I mean, she really like they did a great job giving her lots of wrinkles and like the underneath her eyes, kind of the way that you age. Like, she looks like a tiny old person.
Yeah. What she looks like and sounds like is if you've ever seen Poltergeist, the little clairvoyant lady that comes and she's got the high voice and everything and her whole presence is kind of uncanny. That's what little Punky looks like because you're hearing and sort of seeing, an 8-year-old kid, but it's like she's all done up as an old lady.
And she's trying to do this voice like this,
which kind of goes in and out because she's a kid. So.
Yeah, but it kind of goes full circle because her voice is sort of croaky like that anyway. She has that kind of voice. So yeah, it's very funny. And we just get them, it's really just 10, 12 minutes of them milling around the apartment. The friends come in one by one. But like you said, it's sort of a fantasy to her, except for the fact that eventually she's going to lose Henry. He's going to get wooed away by who?
The teacher. Punky's teacher has a crush on Henry, which we get a little glimpse of in the principal's office scene. The teacher is kind of trying to, ever since my husband died, I've just been all alone, but I do love Valentine's Day, don't you, Henry? Trying to put the moves on him just a little bit, and he wasn't even paying any attention. So yeah, it was interesting that was sort of brought back in this dream, because in her dream, the way she loses Henry is that he decides he's going to marry the teacher, and they're both, very, very old, and they're going to run away together and get married. And Punky's like, well, at least I have you, Brandon. And then the door opens and there's another golden retriever that's all done up in like old lady stuff. That's Brandon's wife. And Brandon runs out and she sits back down on the couch and she says, Margot was right. I'm old and alone. I'm old and alone. I'm alone. And then she wakes up. We get the beginning of the very first of our waking up in a fit and repeating the thing from the dream over and over again.
Yeah. So it does ultimately prove to be kind of a cautionary tale. That sort of, it ends up being a nightmare, sort of what I want to, avoid, what I'm scared of. But then she wakes up, she talks to Henry, and we get all of the sort of messaging and, kind of daddy-daughter explaining that you would expect. We sort of touched on all these different themes now that are related but distinct. We had the consent piece, but you also have the, you're not really alone just because you don't have a spouse type thing. If you've got your friends and your family and your dog, then that's all you really need. It's Yeah, it's the same messaging we'd be getting if this were, you know, a sitcom about Tina Fey or something, but it's
Right.
Little Punky.
Right. And Henry assures her that she can choose to have or not have a boyfriend when the time is right. And that time could be at any point in time. It doesn't have to be just because her friends are, and she'll never truly be alone because of all of the wonderful people she has in her life.
Yeah, I don't know. I found this Little Punky is hard to get a handle on to me. You know, we talked about with Different Strokes, with the Tootie guest appearance, how she had a whole different acting style from him and how she was very charming, but kind of stagey and had that like, how you doing? I'm a little kid, you know, and
Right.
Punky really has that where there's a truth to her, you know, like you really get the feelings you get when she's sad or happy, like those emotions really come through. But at the same time, her delivery is so, you know, hi, everybody, what are we gonna do today? Or like, oh no, Brandon, I guess we can't go to the fair. You know, she just has that old-timey little kid acting style that is a little exhausting.
Yeah, there's something to that, though, because I think that Punky Brewster, the character, is seen as being that in her world as well, right? So she is a precocious kid. Punky is this precocious kid who kind of acts this way. And so the over-the-top kind of kid acting style is also a choice that they're making for who she is in this Punky Brewster world. And so I think there's that, and then there's also that I just grew up with it, so I like it, and I don't even really notice that anymore.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Growing Pains.
As long as we got each other. So we didn't make mention of this in our theme songs episode, but the people who listen to our podcast absolutely have. We've heard from several folks who were like, how could you leave off the Growing Pains theme song? And you're right, it's pretty great, and it's super catchy, and I've been singing it kind of nonstop since we heard it when we watched the episode the other day.
It's a pretty good one. I will make no apologies for not mentioning it on the top 10 list. I think that there are better ones. Here's what I want to say about the opening sequence. Do you remember how, I don't know if it was just for the final season or something, but at some point they changed the intro to this, and it was that same song, but it was like an instrumental version or some sort of a new agey version. And instead of all the clips, it became a much more austere opening sequence where they were like panning past like family photos on a mantle or something.
Oh, I don't really remember that, no.
Theme sequence aside, this was one that I definitely watched as a kid. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't one of my favorites, but I do consider it one of your sort of quintessential, you know, late 80s, early 90s family sitcoms. What I'm kind of marveling at now, you know, we talk about how for all of the history of sitcoms, definitely in the 80s and 90s, you had this sort of formula of a lot of them are about families. There's usually some sort of a hook. Sometimes it's something simple and grounded, like they have different political beliefs, or the family is, you know, put together from two pre-existing families. Sometimes it's more out there, like one of them's an alien or a robot or something. Is Growing Pains the most down the middle, straight up, there is a family, there is a man who married a woman, and they live in a house and have some kids, end of concept, right? There is nothing else to it. It is just a show about a family, no gimmicks, no hooks, no nothing.
Yep. I think they saw the continued success of shows like Family Ties, even as the kids got older and they moved away from that sort of parent hippie dynamic with Alex and his, you know, Reagan era youth kind of thing. And they said, yeah, we can do this. We can have, I guess they're in New Jersey or something, New York, New Jersey area, but not in the city. And they are just a normal family, 3 kids, 2 parents. Dad's a doctor. I don't remember what mom does.
3 kids at this time. We get the revolving door situation after a while when the, original kids get older. Kirk Cameron at this time, after the show was on for a few years, he started kind of having a moment and he was in some movies. I remember my dad never liked him. And when I would ask him why, he would kind of say, it's not like my dad was some kind of tough guy or something, but he would sort of say some version of like, he's a little bit of a wimp, he's a little bit of a weenie. And I didn't totally understand that, but now watching this, as soon as Kirk Cameron opens his mouth, I get it. That guy just never got out of talking like this, and his voice is all up and down. Oh, come on, Dad. I don't want to study for the test. I don't want to do my homework. Like, he's just annoying. And I know that sounds like such an old-timey, like, boomery thing to say. I just find him irritating.
Yeah, I can't remember. Look, there's no denying the fact that Kirk Cameron is attractive. And so I think that's the tiger beat of it, right? Is he's cute. And he was on a famous TV show and he was the older brother.
Well, and just when you say the family ties thing, I think that makes a lot of sense. If this is chasing the coattails of Family Ties and you had, Michael J. Fox had this youth about him that as he kept growing up, he still kind of had this baby face and his voice and everything. You always kind of feel like you're talking to a kid, but for some reason it works for him. With Kirk Cameron, for me anyway, it just doesn't. And that's not saying anything about his later in life foibles, turning into now he makes movies that are all like for the straight to the Christian megachurch distribution market.
Right, exactly. Kirk Cameron was not on my bedroom wall. Like, he was not the kind of kid or, boy that I was interested in when I was a kid. But I know that lots of people were into him. So
yeah, okay.
There's something for everybody. Not every guy can be Al Borland, Jay.
Well, no, Al Borland, he ain't. My God,
not every guy can be your type.
No, if there was ever an opposite of Al Borland, it is. If you look up Al Borland in the thesaurus, it says antonym Kirk Cameron. Luckily, we don't get much Kirk Cameron in this episode. This is going to be a Ben episode, right? So we're focused on the younger boy, the youngest of the 3 kids. He needs to have his tonsils taken out. He's stressed out. He's anxious. It's a little bit of a contrived setup, I think, how we get this whole thing. But basically, while he's there on the little gurney and they're telling him, just relax. I know you don't want to have surgery, but you have to. And his dad says something like, be a Seaver, Seavers are tough, Seavers are resilient, be a Seaver, make us proud. And he's like, well, then I don't want to be a Seaver. If Seavers get surgery, then I don't want to be a Seaver,
This is Home Alone if it was a dream.
Yes, exactly. I'd rather not have a family at all. So, he says that, and then they cart him off to surgery. When we get that conversation with the doctor trying to sort of have a little rapport with him as he's, passing out from the surgery, we get this inside joke where he's like, tell me about your favorite TV shows, Ben. And so he says, oh, well, I like all kinds of shows, like Who's the Boss and Moonlighting, and that show that comes on in between them. The little kid on that show is really funny. So
guess what show that was, everybody?
I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that Moonlighting and Who's the Boss were the shows before and after Growing Pains at this time.
You would be correct. And Ben was referring to the little boy being pretty good, and that was himself.
Yeah, obviously. So
he also mentions Gilligan's Island, which we're going to get a little callback to as he slips into the dream.
Yeah, I would say we're going to get a big callback to it because, he passes out from the surgery. It's one of these things where, I guess if you're really not if you're really not looking for it, it's trying to pass it off like it's not a dream, like he's just getting up and escaping from his surgery. He meets this mysterious cab driver outside, and we get another sort of mini trope here. A lot of times, sitcoms will use the dream sequence as an excuse for the celebrity cameo, right? Blossom loved to do that. I think for a while, that was part of the gimmick of Blossom, is every episode, they would have a fun celebrity cameo in some sort of daydream or something that Blossom would have. So in this case, it's the skipper from Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, Skipper from Gilligan's Island is the taxi driver. So Ben wakes up. In his mind, he thinks he's waking up before they've begun the surgery because he looks over and they're washing their hands, and he jumps down off the gurney, runs out of the operating room. We get a couple of gags with the gown being open in the back and people laughing at him. And then he runs out the front door, or runs toward the front door, and he bumps into the skipper from Gilligan's Island, who says, where do you want me to take you? This word on my cap isn't here for nothing, so he's got the cap that looks exactly like the Gilligan's cap, the skipper's cap from Gilligan's Island, but instead of the anchor, it has the word taxi written on it. So they get in the car, and the taxi driver knows his address and says, 15 whatever drive.
Yes. I would be very scared at this point. If I was Ben and this weird, jolly cab driver that's just laughing at everything you say and saying weird, cryptic things like, don't worry about where we're going, or can't get there from here, like all kinds of weird, enigmatic sayings. And then when he's like, oh, don't worry, I know where you live, 15 Robin Head Lane, that's the address. Like at that point, I would be like, let me see if I can roll out of the car and, land on the pavement without hurting myself.
Get safe. And he says to him, he's like, wait, how did you know my address? And he said, because you just told me. And he's like, no, but you said it before. And he goes, what are you talking about? And then they just let it go.
Yeah. So he gets home, and we get what I would say is another sort of, in fiction in general, a sort of trope of dreams and fantasies and stuff. The Christmas Carol / It's a Wonderful Life sort of, what if I didn't exist? What if my family didn't know me type of thing. In this case, there's a Ben Seaver, there's like an alternate bizarro Ben Seaver, who I think is Bobby Budnick from Salute Your Shorts.
Yes,
did you confirm
it's baby
that?
Bobby Budnick. He had been on Different Strokes, and then he was in this, and then later on in Salute Your Shorts, he became more of like a bully, right? Wasn't Bobby Budnick kind of a bully?
He's a little bully. He's more of like your streetwise, like he's a little bit of a bad boy, you know?
Okay. Well, so in this, he's a puny little kid. He is, head and shoulders shorter than Ben. He's this little redheaded kid with the page boy haircut.
Yeah.
He
and
looks like Dorothy Hamill.
Don't think we're not noticing the coding that like the redhead kid is supposed to be a little creepy. We're supposed to be turned against this kid from the
That's
start.
right. And as redheads, we are offended.
Yeah, it's definitely supposed to, it's supposed to get under your skin a little bit. Like, what is this little sort of hellspawn kid doing here instead of the Ben we know and love? But so, yeah, it's a lot of like, the new Ben has this weird sort of like, I'm peachy keen and everything's swell and gee willikers, Dad. Like this weird Leave It to Beaver energy that sort of pervades the whole family. And I don't know, I guess we're supposed to understand, like, well, the real Ben is a little mopey and jaded. And so
at the beginning of the episode, we get the scene of Ben's last dinner, last supper or whatever, before he has the surgery. And we get the shout outs to him being kind of a glutton. Like he always wants to eat sweets. He overeats. He just piles on his plate. He wants to play video games, but none of his family's into video games, so they don't want to play with him.
The Super Vito Brothers.
Right, because they can't say Super Mario Brothers. So he's got the actual Nintendo games, like the old gray Nintendo sort of rectangle games.
Yes.
And he's like, you want to play Super Vito Brothers? And no. And then his dad says, oh, I'll play with you. And he's like, yeah, you're bad at it. I don't want to play with you, Dad. And so there's all these ways where Ben is kind of feeling left out in the family. And then you get this perfect, in quotes, kid coming in, and the whole family. It reminded me of Other Mother.
from Coraline. Definitely. But it's funny to me how, because the show is so wholesome in the first place,
how far they had to go to make it even more wholesome. It was like creepy wholesome.
Right. Like Ben's character flaws, quote unquote, are he likes video games.
And junk food.
Yeah, and junk food. You know, 10-year-old kid likes video games. And so, they have to make this kid like this crazy Mickey Mouse Club parody to sort of distinguish him. And like I said, it pervades the whole family and they've all got this creepy vibe. They have some hilariously primitive special effects, like your sort of local weatherman type special effects to show, Ben walking through the family to just sort of make sure you understand. Again, like A Christmas Carol, he's a ghost, essentially. They can't see him. And there's just kind of a lot of this. The alternate Ben can see him and interact with him. Yeah.
And so I remember watching this episode as a kid. And first of all, was shocked to see Ben Seaver's ID.
Yes, his family membership card.
His family membership card says he was born in 1976. I was like, whoa, that, again, another kid that was a little older than me that I thought was my same age. But so I remember watching this. I remember thinking how weird it was that there was this creepy replacement kid. And then they were getting into these arguments about, I'm a better Seaver than you. You said you didn't want to be a Seaver anymore. And I'm just going to kick your puny little butt, because you're tinier than me. And then he's, the little one's like, I would do that if I were you. So it was all this fun, gaggy stuff.
It's meant to be like a little bit of a Twilight Zone thing, like a little bit of a creepy, uncanny thing. And ultimately, of course, it's meant to drive home, there's no place like home. I shouldn't have ever doubted my commitment to being a Seaver. I shouldn't have said that. Of course, they hilariously show you the clip from earlier that episode as though you're at the end of a 4-hour movie. And it's like, oh, you might not remember this part that we subtly introduced at the beginning. So let's play that part again.
We'll play that again. And you said you didn't want to be a Seaver. And so then real Ben says, well, I'll go back to the hospital and I'll have the surgery and it'll be fine. And new Ben, you see him sort of freak out.
Well, he's back. I don't know if it's supposed to be like he died or something, but he's in the hospital room. It's all dark and weird and nightmarish, and he's hearing the doctors talk to each other, and they're not acknowledging him. And for as weird and lame as the special effects were earlier, there's this cool match cut where he's in the little stretcher or the gurney or whatever going like, no, I want to be a Seaver. I want to be a Seaver. And as they push him through the door, it cuts to real life. And, they're pushing him through the door, out of the operating room, back into the hallway. And it's reality again. But again, I think the way that these episodes are shaping up, it's a nice sort of survey course of like the different subtropes of dreams, because if the one is like, oh, what'll it be like when I'm old? And that's a chance to put on a bunch of funny old age makeup. Now we get the, oh, what if I didn't exist? Or what if I was another person or whatever, and all that. Oh, my family can see right through me. And I can't think of all the examples offhand, but this is definitely something that they love to do in TV and movies.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Who's the Boss?
Well, I am.
Okay. Problem solved. Where do we go from here?
So this is season 6, episode 3, In Your Dreams. Who's the boss? We haven't covered this on the podcast before. So the premise is there's a working single mother. She's an ad executive and who goes on to actually own her own ad agency later on in the series, commutes to the city for work, needs someone to help out and potentially be a role model for her son. Tony Danza, former baseball player, has a daughter and is divorced, or the mom died, I don't remember, but he's looking to change his life as well. He becomes the live-in housekeeper, and then they sort of become the kind of parents to each other's kids. Judith Light's Angela becomes a sort of motherly role model for Alyssa Milano's Samantha, and then Tony Danza becomes the kind of dad character for the little boy Jonathan. And then we have funny Mona, right? So at season 6, we're well into the will they, won't they of Tony and Angela. Who's the Boss really tried to keep that at bay in a similar fashion to a lot of other shows. And at this point, they have not yet told each other that they have feelings, but it's kind of clear to everybody else.
But the whole premise of this show is very much wrapped up in those 80s gender roles, right? This is a Mr. Mom type thing where it's like, sure, at the end of the day, it's going to be the personalities and the presences of these characters that we like, but part of the hook of the show is, get this, the wife is this, workaholic, upwardly mobile, professional type, and the dad is the housekeeper, and not only you see the dad, but he's Tony Danza, right? So you know him as this, rough and tumble boxer type guy from his role on Taxi. And wasn't he a boxer in real life? Or
I think so. When he was young, before Taxi. I think that's how that role kind of came about.
Now, the way I always processed this was as a rival to Charles in Charge, right? To me, it was like, it's like the Yankees and the Mets. You can't like both. You're either a Charles person or a Tony Danza person, because they were both these, sort of cheesy sitcoms set in mostly beige living rooms about a family with this sort of Italian tough guy as a live-in housekeeper. But the truth is that there is a world of difference between them. And the reason why I don't think I ever really got into Who's the Boss, aside from it just being, a partisan divide with Charles in Charge, is that it's not really focused on the kids, and of course, I'm sure some episodes are. And Alyssa Milano, in terms of teen heartthrob viability, is absolutely a worthy competitor to Nicole Eggert. But a lot of the show was about the adult issues and the adult relationships. And Tony Danza is an adult. He's not like, on the verge of manhood like Scott Baio was. He is a full-on man. He's a dad with a teenage daughter. And I have to say, I don't want to be rude to Judith Light, but Angela was just then and now did not hold appeal to me. She was like, if Big Bird was a human woman, she would be Judith Light, I just found her not appealing, not sexy, not funny. It wasn't like I didn't like her, but there was just her charisma for me. It didn't make contact,
You should interrogate that notion within yourself, because I would say that the reason that probably is that she defies those gender roles. She defies that stereotype and very much is a woman in control, woman in charge. She, there's a great episode of Community where Abed tries to figure out who's the boss, and it's really funny. I would say over and over and over again, Angela's the boss. Angela is the boss.
Sure.
She is the boss. And I think there were oftentimes, and that was the press around it at the time, very much felt the same way as you, that she could not be this leading lady. That's why they had to have Mona in there as this more feminine, kind of fabulous character. But I disagree. She is tall and lanky and asymmetrical. She has a big, long face. You basically are dating her.
Well, you're not that tall, frankly.
That's true. I'm not that tall.
I absolutely would not rule out those kind of biases. But that said, the way I experience it is not butting up against her challenging those gender roles. It really is just a matter of charisma. The same way I just don't like Dennis Quaid. You know, it's not anything about him. He's not a bad actor. I just don't get excited when he shows up in a movie. And for me, this Angela character was kind of like that. For that matter, to an extent, this whole cast is a little bit like that for me. You know, the boy, also the teenage boy. Again, I was ragging on Kirk Cameron for being a little bit of a weenie. I think I have to put this kid in the same category.
He's not even really a teenager. He's a little kid still.
You would think that by the sound of his voice, but I think he is a teenager.
You are just not a Who's the Boss fan.
Demand, you know, I demand
manly men
manhood
and feminine women.
Testosterone.
So this episode, though, another dream episode written by Daniel Palladino, who we know from his wife's fame. And, you know, he is often a producer on her work. But Amy Sherman Palladino did Mrs. Maisel, Gilmore Girls, Bunheads, a whole slew of shows.
Yeah. So it takes a while to get to the dream element of this. The basic story of this episode is that Tony has to house sit for their friend, right? It begins with this sort of chaotic scene. The kids are leaving, everyone's blah, 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 and their friend is like, kind of guilts him into house sitting. I have a cat. You need to take care of my cat. You need to take care of my apartment in Brooklyn. So the important thing...
This is Tony and Sam's former neighbor from their old neighborhood where they used to live.
Right.
And she is a recurring guest star, Mrs. Roselli or something like that is her name. And she comes in and she's like a thorn in Mona's side. And she's this fun little foil. And so she's going on a cruise and she says, thanks for letting me borrow your luggage. And also, you know, emotionally blackmails Tony into pet sitting her cat. So he's going to spend the weekend or the next week or something in the city, back in Brooklyn, in his hometown. So we get to see some really nice return to what his life was like moments.
Yeah, which basically involves meeting a few of his old friends, right? We meet his neighbors, who's basically a married couple and their his sister.
Sister-in-law, something like that.
Yeah. He comes home, he meets his friend, and they're going to go bowling, and then Angela shows up. She wanted to surprise Tony.
Yeah, she felt bad that he sort of got guilt tripped into doing this. And so she was like, well, if he has to go spend this next week in Brooklyn, at least I'll come hang out with him. And again, we're in this season 6. So they have not said that they love each other or how they feel about each other, but it's really apparent over and over and over again throughout the series. Tony Danza, for his part, was against them ever being together. Like, he very much felt that the premise of the show was that friendship and love that didn't have to become something else, even if they really cared about each other and they were so embroiled in each other's lives because they were raising each other's kids. But so she comes to visit him and realizes right away that she's out of place because she is this Connecticut girl and now she's in Brooklyn with these working class folks.
The ladies, you know, the way that they're cast, the way that they're sort of characterized seemed odd at first, and then it sort of clicks in. Like, everything about them is just supposed to be the opposite of Angela. You're saying how she represents this challenge to the sort of status quo, the sort of retrograde gender roles. They're like, we sure love those gender roles. You know, the one thing that we live for is being pregnant. Like, she says straight up, you know, I used to have a job. I used to kind of control my own fate, but now I kind of like it letting Joey take care of all that. You know, they're just advancing this sort of old school mentality. We like being wives. We like being moms. We like staying home. You know, just everything that Angela isn't.
Right. And again, I think they do an okay job with it. Because they're presenting it without judgment, right? They're saying that, like, I'm choosing this, I want this. So yeah, I could have worked, I could have done that, but I kind of really like raising the kids and making food, and that's an okay choice too.
Well,
right?
you gotta.
They're not trying to come down on that as the wrong choice.
No, again, in the context of when this is coming out in the mid-'80s, The only reason we have this show is because those norms are accepted by society, and there is a funny irony in the woman being the, yuppie success story and the man being the housekeeper. So yeah, it would make a lot of sense that at this time, everyone involved would be sympathetic to these women, whereas now, if you had characters like this, they would be conspicuously old school.
Right. It would be more of a caricature. But I think they are going for a caricature here. And I think it's on purpose.
Yeah, but it's like you said, it's like a warm-hearted caricature.
Yes. And they do it in a nice way. And when it gets flipped and we go into Angela's dream and she has become this caricature and she and Tony are married and she has, she gave up her work long ago and they've got a ton of kids and she's hugely pregnant and he's asking for breakfast and they're living in the apartment and, it's all Brooklyn life. She's imagining they have a conversation on the balcony about it. And he in her dream is like, why would you want to work? Why would you want to leave this? And she's kind of struggling to say that, she is happy, but she would like to do other things as well. And that's okay. And Dream Tony can't handle it. He's like, well, if, you want to leave me and you want to go do other things, I guess, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to cook and take care of the kids and clean. Can you imagine me, a housekeeper? Blah. And he's the one that really, they're making fun of this man thing, the fragile man of not being able to handle the changing gender roles. And they really poke at that through Dream Tony's speech. But then Angela wakes up and wants to have that same conversation with real Tony. And that, I think, is an interesting conversation.
Yeah. So we sort of brushed by what the whole dream was. Yeah, she dreams this alternate life that she had, where she and Tony are a married couple and where basically they are living the lives that these neighbors have. And, it's similar to Punky Brewster's old age thing in the sense that it's kind of like, you wake up in this other world, in this other life, and, we get to see you kind of mill around in that for a few minutes and we have a few gags. The interesting thing about it is that ultimately it's, kind of similar to the other ones. It's like it starts out as a dream, like, oh, this might be what I want. And then it sort of mutates into like, no, what I really want is my normal life.
Right. Or some variation on that, right? Because you can tell from the moment Angela arrives at the apartment that she is there because she wants to have some alone time with Tony and maybe have a deeper conversation about how they feel about each other or just spend some time with him where the kids aren't around and Mona isn't around. And you see her disappointment when she realizes that he's having a blast with his old friends. And she immediately starts to feel out of place. And the women are not judgmental of her at all. And she's not judgmental of them. But you can just see this culture clash and so she goes to sleep with this worry of, is this what Tony wants? And could I be that? And so that's what we're seeing in the dream is this projection of, I think I might want to be with him. I think I might want to be with Tony. Is this what he wants? Could I be that? What would it be like if I was that? And that's the dream. And even in the dream, she realizes that she can't really be that. And so she wakes up worried, wanting to have that same conversation with real Tony about what it would be like to maybe be together.
Yeah. She, in a sense, the dream is almost like running the simulation of that other world, that other path, and coming to the realization that no, she still veers towards having a career and all that. Like you said, she has this conversation with Tony out on the balcony. And then, when she wakes up, she's still, I don't know, she's just like making these jokes for us, the audience, I guess, because she's going like, can we talk on our usual spot?
And he's looking at her like, what are you talking about?
Usual spot, you never been here before. But they go out on the balcony again in real life. And I don't know what she just kind of says like, oh, do you ever think about, you know, if we had a different life, if we were together.
Well, she says, are you sad that you didn't do this, that you didn't have, the wife and everything? And he's like, no, I love my life. I mean, my life's great. I get to live with you guys. This is what a great role model you are for Sam. This is so wonderful. And she said, well, would you prefer it if if the person you were with was at home and doing the cooking and cleaning and whatever? And he's like, why are you asking about these weird stereotypes? Yeah. Like, that's not who we are. The reason I live where I live is because I think it's ridiculous that these are the stereotypes. I love being home with the kids and cleaning up and making dinner. I'm the best cook. It's, you'd never get my, veal cutlets if it wasn't for me,
Yeah. And she gazes lovingly at his like casual progressivism,
Exactly.
Like they show her just looking at him like, oh, you're nothing like Dream Tony. You think that women can have jobs.
That's right. You're the perfect man. Oh.
Yeah. So again, it's another sort of, Dream gives you an opportunity to explore alternate scenario.
What was interesting, though, is we don't get a lot of the kids in this episode, which is a bummer, because I really liked Alyssa Milano in this. She was somebody that was definitely, on my wall because she was so cool. Like, I always thought Alyssa Milano was so cool. She had the coolest hair, the coolest clothes. I always wanted to be just like her. Her and Punky Brewster. I was super into both of them. Thought they were like the coolest.
Yeah. The kid, their function in the dream, the boy is a greaser, right? Like she's sort of dressed up just kind of like a, like a punker, like a...
Yeah, I mean, they're just doing the thing of like, this is what kids look like who grew up in the rough city, And
Yeah.
they're sort of, badass, but not really because they're still kids. And he's talking about riding his bicycle to school. And she's like, and Sam is like, isn't he so cool? He's the baddest boy, but that's like her brother. So
Yeah.
It's just weird.
The other thing I had about this was just like, I thought that they could have had more fun with the change of her. We talked about the old age makeup, the, all the different, the ways that they can screw around with these dream sequence things. Angela's pregnant in the dream. And that's about it, and I feel like if you're going to have a dream with an alternate reality, I don't know, do something, give her different clothes, get different hair.
Yeah, she does do a little bit of a New York accent. She brings that in, but you're right. They also, I think this was at the point in time where this series, it was past its prime, you know what I mean? They'd moved it. It used to run opposite The Cosby Show. It was a big ratings winner. And then they moved it to Saturday night to try to create like a TGIF, but on Saturday night. And it was with Growing Pains and Perfect Strangers. And so they had this Saturday night, like 4-show block. And there was a cartoon or something that went with it too. There was the 4 shows. They wanted to make like a TGIF Saturday night, and it just didn't really work. And all the ratings for all of those shows just tanked on Saturday night because by that time, like you and I have said multiple times, all of us who watched them as kids were sort of aging out of watching things. And on Saturday nights, we were out with friends or we were doing sleepovers or we were doing other things. So they lost their viewership on when they got moved to Saturday night, and both Growing Pains and Who's the Boss were canceled the same season.
Well, Saturday night is just a bad idea. I think that's just like a Crystal Pepsi type thing. Like,
yeah, but that was a big time. Golden Girls was on Saturday night. Like for a while, it was, oh yeah, everybody's home, families are home, we want to give them TV to watch. And then going to Saturday night became the death knell because that just wasn't the way of things anymore. People weren't watching TV on Saturday; they were doing other things.
All right, moving on to Frasier.
Frasier, season 4, episode 3, The Impossible Dream.
Yeah, Frasier is a big one. We have discussed the man on Cheers. He ran the seminar for people who are afraid to fly, but now we're getting solo Frasier.
Frasier, to me, it's one of those ones that anytime it was on and I was home, I would watch it. Or if it was on in reruns, I would watch the rerun. It's a show that I love, but I have never watched it all the way through. And I couldn't tell you like the various storyline arcs and stuff like that. But it never fails. Anytime I watch an episode, it's good for a great laugh. The acting is amazing. I mean, just like what a cast, right? You've got John Mahoney, who is an amazing actor. David Hyde Pierce, another amazing actor. Kelsey Grammer, I think of all the three of them, is the weakest in terms of his like acting prowess. But that could just be because he's played the same guy for his whole life. Like he can't even use his real voice anymore because the Frasier voice has taken over his whole life.
Yeah. And people have their opinions about him off camera and on. I feel like he's become a little bit of a controversial figure. But we should say this is a spin-off, obviously, and this is one of the great spin-off success stories, and so when we're watching these YouTube videos about, the 12 failed sitcom spin-offs and why didn't they work? And it seems like, they keep trying these things. It never works. You wonder, why do they keep doing it? It's because, like, once in a while when they hit the jackpot like this, it's amazing. And I think the reason why Frasier is so successful is because they honed in and chose the one thing that they were going to take from Cheers, and the rest of the DNA of the show is completely different and new. It's all new people. It's a whole new vibe. It's a different kind of show, still a multicam sitcom, but it's not an ensemble the way Cheers was. It's not trying to beat Cheers at its own game. It's doing its own different thing.
Sure. And it is an ensemble in a different way. It's not everybody in the workplace, right? You've got a family, and then you've got like live-in help, and then you've got a coworker.
Yeah.
And so that is it's sort of the like way that a single person moving through the world kind of has the mix of family, your friends and family, that sometimes it's colleagues and sometimes it's people in your social circle, and sometimes it's people who are related to you. But so I think the thing that Frasier kind of always got right is that they were able to balance Frasier's whole thing of being sort of high class and snooty with his dad, who was the down to earth retired cop kind of energy. And then you had Niles, who also had that upper crust kind of snooty thing.
Yeah.
But then you had Perry Gilpin, who played Roz. So in every aspect of Frasier's life, he had Roz, who was a little bit more kind of down homey, and his dad, who was a little bit, more working class. He had this reality check to his, everything is so, I'm just Frasier.
Lots of foils, lots of contrasts. I will say, I think David Hyde Pierce is the secret weapon of the show. I think that's a big part of why it was so successful.
John Mahoney also.
I mean, look, they're all great, but for me, I think he's the one that they were like, this Kelsey Grammer guy has this very specific thing that he does. Can we find somebody who does something that's very similar, but also fundamentally different? And he just has that. His whole look, his whole manner is just, it's in some ways a contrast to Frasier. In some ways, it's the same as him. And I think the two of them, as we'll see in this episode, when you get them trying to sort of attack a problem together, it's very fun.
Yes.
So this particular episode, it's kind of an outlier from the other Dream episodes we're talking about. This isn't one where it's like, okay, we're going to have some issue that comes up and then the centerpiece of the episode is going to be this weird fantasy sequence. This is going to be one where Frasier is having a recurring dream that we see variations on several times, and it's all about him trying to figure out what it means. And because this is the 1990s, this is going to be all about gay panic, right?
Yes, and so again, I think for their time, they did a pretty good job at not trying to go full gay panic. You get Frasier questioning his sexuality, not in a way where he's actually questioning his sexuality, but he's saying, should I be questioning my sexuality? So he's not upset that he might be gay. He's upset that there is this dream that is disturbing him and he might need to have a think about his sexuality. And then you have his dad, who also, you know, he's more old fashioned, and you knew he didn't want, you know, Frasier didn't want to tell his dad about the dream because he was worried he was going to be judged. And then when he does tell his dad about the dream, his dad's like, I don't want to hear this kind of stuff, but then kind of immediately gets past it and gives him some pretty good advice, you know, and so, but where I think where we see what you're saying is that in the hesitancy to talk about the subject matter of the dream.
Yeah, so let's back up and explain what's going on here. His dream is every time he wakes up in bed in a hotel or a motel and he's got a tattoo on his arm that says Chesty.
Right.
And somebody's in the shower, right? We hear, like, from the next room, from the bathroom, we hear the sounds of someone in the shower. And at least the first time we see the dream anyway, he sort of gets this look like, oh, okay, I guess I got lucky. And then this guy comes out of the dream, who I guess is part of the regular cast.
He's a recurring character. He is one of the other radio personalities at Frasier's work, and he is a food critic, and he's very flamboyant.
Okay, so he is an openly gay man. That's part of his whole thing.
Who often makes sexual innuendos.
Okay.
Like him eating the eclair in that scene where we see them in real life, and through the studio window, he's biting on the eclair and being like, oh, don't you want some?
John Waters, this is your in-your-face crazy guy. Okay, so that's who he just slept with. This guy kind of comes out of the shower and kind of mugs to the camera and maybe says a line or something, and Frasier wakes up horrified. And that's the dream that he's kind of going around asking everybody or sort of fretting about, you know, what does this mean? And we should also say the other sort of piece of the premise here is he's in a slump professionally. The callers on his call-in radiotherapy show are boring him.
Right. So he's in this slump at work. The callers are not providing any challenge. He has this one caller, Rudy, who is like, they call him Rudy the Crier, and he calls and cries, and that's all it is. Like, so he's not getting to activate his intellect in any way. And that will come, we'll find, you know, we'll hear more about that later. But so the first person that he goes to tell his dream about and try to figure out what's going on is Roz. She offers him zero help and then just spreads the gossip around the office.
Yeah. He's going to try to obscure the whole truth about his dream in different ways with his different conversation partners. So at first he tries, tell them about the dream, tell them it's about a coworker, just don't tell them who or the gender. So that's what he does with Roz, but, you know, sort of by process of elimination, it comes out that he's talking about Gil, that's this guy, and word spreads like wildfire, and like you said, he doesn't get any insight.
Right. And then the next scene, we are in the coffee shop, which at this moment, I got up to go get a cup of coffee because Frasier always does this to me. Every single time Frasier and Niles are sitting in the coffee shop having the scene, because there's always at least one in every episode where they're in the coffee shop, having the scene where they're drinking their coffee, it makes me want to have a cup of coffee.
It's the 90s. It's, you know, between Friends, Frasier, the rise of Starbucks. Yeah, we loved our coffee. I have to say, this scene, you know, this is what I'm talking about with the two of them sort of attacking a problem together. And some of the quotes, you know, their hoity-toity way of talking to each other. When Frasier tells Niles, you know, he basically does the asking for a friend thing.
Yes.
And Niles goes, oh, Frasier, that gambit hasn't worked since we were in knee socks. You know, that's his way of saying, you know, since we were little kids. Yeah. So the two of them are trying to figure out this dream. And this is where I say we get a little bit of the 90s gay panic stuff. Now, you're trying to draw this distinction between, like, well, he's not considering his sexuality, but he's considering it or whatever. The bottom line to me is, anytime it's suggested, like, Frasier, this might be, the phrase that Niles uses later is wish fulfillment, but anytime it's suggested, you might have some sort of homosexual component to your psyche. There might be something going on there. He sort of gets up and spins around and gets all flustered. No, change the subject.
Yeah.
And again, it's the 90s. It's played for laughs.
Right, because we weren't allowed to be on a spectrum of sexuality in the 90s. You were either straight or you were gay. There was none of this, like, I'm on my way to, I'm in between
And
this.
that being mischaracterized was just not okay. It's the same thing as you throw like a girl or something. It's just like, it's not okay to call a straight man gay, full stop. And so we get that, we get that
We're going to pull that clip out of context and ruin you. Jay is going to be canceled forever because he took a big pause before he said that.
Parker Lewis style.
Parker Lewis style.
Yeah. And I just felt like, dude, you're a therapist, like you're a psychiatrist. It's not okay to have this like heebie-jeebie, oogie-woogie, oh my God, like we can't talk about gay stuff, like this idea that I could not possibly acknowledge that possibility in myself, for a therapist was quite alarming to me.
Yeah, no, and that is a point well made because you're absolutely right. And I think when we see the other side of that, when he's trying to get beyond that, is when he's having the same conversation with his dad later on, because he is the more progressive one, right? So like in that situation, Frasier is the more progressive one. And so he's having to be more open and talk about it in such a way that will help bring his dad over to the side of, you can talk about being gay. And that is truly when he starts asking, should I be questioning my own sexuality? Whereas earlier on, when he's having the conversation with Niles, he won't hear it. He's like, I'm not questioning. Like, this dream has to be about something other than the fact that I'm questioning my own sexuality. I know I'm straight. I'm fine. That's not what this is about. Let's keep driving. Let's keep pushing. But the inability to talk about it and the uncomfort that he displays for comedic effect is absolutely a sign of the times.
Yeah, definitely. Again, it's just like, but come on, guys, he's gay. He might be gay. Come on, it's funny. It's funny. Like, you absolutely get that vibe. But so the story, again, unlike our other episodes, which sort of focus on one central dream, he has this sort of trial and error approach to figuring out the dream. There's this idea, as Niles puts it, if you figure out what the dream means, then it passes from your subconscious to your conscious mind and you stop having the dream. So it's a matter of going, okay, the gay guy in the shower symbolizes, my pet rock from 3rd grade. And so now problem solved, so he keeps trying these different interpretations. I thought it was very funny. He and Niles do this like stream of consciousness thing where they're like, well, I think this is sort of like a Carl Jung thing of like, let's analyze the specific objects, right? No detail is too small. So he goes, okay, well, I had a croissant, food, butter. I'm on a diet. He goes, I'm on a diet. Do you think that could be helpful? And Niles goes, yeah, you could stand to lose a few pounds. But being about food is one of the interpretations that they try. And so we see again and again him having the dream, like these different variations of like, who's it going to be this time or whatever. And he can't quite get it.
Right. So when they think it's about food, he says, oh, that's it. That must be what it is. I'm upset because I'm not, I should give myself a break on my diet. I'm going to have something. And then he orders something there at the coffee shop. And he thinks when he goes to sleep that night, the dream will no longer recur. And he has it again.
Yeah. And so on and so forth. And Daphne finds out about this. And I only bring that up because it was another great Frasier and nihilism when he realizes that Niles has told her about it. He goes, Niles, you gossipy fishwife. Just another great Frasier quote. But yeah, he ends up talking to the dad, who at first won't hear it, and then is kind of like, all right, fine, we can talk about it if you want to, or whatever. And Yeah, he's like, well, I have no choice but to confront the possibility that I might be gay, and he kind of like stares the abyss dead in the eyes. But then it's like one way or another, he comes to the realization of like, oh no, it's Chekhov's professional dissatisfaction,
Right. That was from the conversation with his dad. So earlier they have a coded conversation with the dad, with John Mahoney. And because Frasier and Niles think that Hester or Hesty, Chesty on his arm comes from their mother's name, Hester. And maybe she had a nickname that was Hesty. And so they have this like coded conversation, and Frasier, again, is like, you're right, this is just an Oedipal dream. That's all it is. No big deal. Goes to bed, has the same dream again, only with a few changes. And then, we go on about the episode. So when he has the talk with his dad, he has the moment where, like you said, he is like, okay, I think I need to really interrogate my sexuality. And his dad's like, Frasier, you can do that, fine, but, you're straight as long as I've known you. You know what I mean?
He just points out, like, you're 40-something years old. Like,
you already would have known.
Yeah.
Like, you were a kid that was always exposed to any type of thing that you wanted. You were never held back in any way. And Frasier's like, you're right, I was very sensitive. Like, I probably would have come to this already if that's what I was interested in.
Frasier's having the same thoughts, I think every straight person has had at some point or another, where he's going, well, I wasn't good at sports, or I wasn't, like everyone has that moment where they're like, oh, gee, I don't know. But yeah, his dad sort of shrugs it off.
Right.
I also want to add, when his dad first gets all uncomfortable, when he first introduces the subject, he immediately grabs a sponge and starts cleaning the outside of the refrigerator with a sponge, a dry sponge.
He's going to keep himself busy so he doesn't have to have this conversation.
I just thought that was very funny business. But I feel like it's one of those things that, like, as Frasier is sort of talking his way through this, he kind of takes himself back to the professional, sort
boredom.
of slump he's in. Yeah.
Right. And so his dad says, well, if nothing else, you've had your nose in these books all along. Like, it probably means nothing if you can't find it in the books. And Frasier goes, Dad, that's it. I've had my nose in these books. This is what it was. The whole reason for this dream was that I had nothing intellectually stimulating at work. And so my mind has come up with something that will be intellectually stimulating for me. Oh, joy. Oh, rapture. I'm not a gay.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. He's relieved to solve his dream, like we said before. And so I guess he does.
But then he has the dream again, right?
Right. So he has the dream, and this time Sigmund Freud comes out of his bathroom.
No, he knocks on the front door. Because Frasier wakes up, there's no tattoo on his arm, there's no shower running. He's like, all right. Or he wakes up in the dream.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, great. This is, the dream has changed. It's different. Now I can just go back to sleep. And he lays back down to go back to sleep in the dream. And there's a knock at the door, and it's Freud.
Yeah. But he comes in and is like, great, you solved the dream. Congratulations. And at first Frasier's like, oh, of course, this is the perfect, like, victory dream, being congratulated by Sigmund Freud. And
I have so many questions for you, he says.
Yeah, and he basically, Freud gets into bed and is like, let's do it.
Yeah, he's like, well, I'm happy to answer all of your questions, but first, and he gets into under the covers in the bed, and Frasier is like, oh, okay. Just like giving in to the fact that he's going to have homoerotic dreams.
Yeah, I don't know. This one, I think this was a pretty fun episode, but almost not part of the trope. I feel like they don't use that trope of the dream in the same way. But then again, Frasier being a psychiatrist and that being the premise of the show, it sort of makes sense that they would do something different with it.
Right, that they would take the dream sequence aspect into this recurring thing that he was trying to work out in real life, rather than have the whole working out of the thing happen in the dream, which is all of our other shows. That's what they do. They have the person in the dream sequence realize the error of their ways, and or have some moment of clarity where, you know, the subconscious becomes the conscious, and then they wake up. Frasier wasn't getting that in his dream. He kept waking up early trying to solve the problem. So if he maybe had stayed asleep longer, if he didn't wake up at the time he kept waking himself up, you know, or being so aware in his own mind during the dream, then we could have gotten a different episode. But to your point, this is what you do with the show when you have the lead actor being the psychiatrist.
Yeah, you got to imagine a lot of the stories are going to be about him having to use his psychoanalytical skills on himself.
Right.
So I don't know, looking back on these, what they all have in common, again, it's kind of like a nice survey course where each one is doing sort of like a different subtrope of what sitcoms tend to do with the dreams. It's always a big swing. I feel like that's what they have in common, is that the dream sequence is always a way to do some sort of a big swing story-wise that you couldn't just do in the confines of like normal waking life. And to me, the Punky Brewster takes it in terms of having the most fun with it and therefore being the most fun to watch. Seeing Punky Brewster dressed up, you know, like she's like a little like oracle from the Neverending Story or something. And her little friend, I forgot to mention, the boy, when
Alan,
they put on
it's so funny.
The little mustache and hair on him, he looks like the Muppet character who's like the old man that runs the hotel in The Great Muppet Caper.
Oh, nice. See, I was thinking he looked like Uncle, what's his name, who writes from Fraggle Rock, who writes the letters.
Oh, Uncle Traveling Matt. Sure. Yeah. They look like creatures. It's just so funny. They're covered in so many layers of stuff.
Yeah.
They look like these little creations.
Well, and Sherry, they made her look like Tyler Perry's mama, like from Big Mama's House, because they put her in this huge fat suit and she's like bumping off walls and squeezing through doors and stuff.
And the dad, the foster dad, Henry, looks like the villain at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, who drinks from the wrong chalice and gets like super zombified before your eyes. He's got the like fright wig and everything. Yeah, that one, they just, like I said, they have the most fun with it. It's as simple as that. The Growing Pains one is also fun. Like, I like that they're doing that sort of Twilight Zone, sort of the devil and Daniel Webster or whatever type thing, you know, but
I think Growing Pains would have been my number one had it not been a Ben episode, because Ben is the weakest character and actor of all of them. I mean, he is the littlest one, so whatever, but he just wasn't captivating for me, and this whole show is about him. So I was like, all right, I mean, it was funny and it was cute and they did what they needed to do. But had this been a Carol dream, or had this been a mom dream or something, I feel like it would have been more interesting.
To me, it had to do with the story, like I said, just being like, guys, go back, spend another 10 minutes working this out, like making this be a little bit more cohesive, make a little bit more sense. The idea that because he doesn't want to get his tonsils taken out, he's going to renounce his family name. Like, it's just kind of like you're mixing and matching your anxieties and your issues. And the Who's the Boss, that was fun. But again, if you're going to make an episode where your centerpiece is going to be Angela having this dream where her life is completely different and she had taken this whole different path, and it's a sitcom, for Pete's sake, like, yeah, just do a little more with it. You know, sure, you're on the right track with the fake belly, but I just felt like if it's going to be a dream sequence and an alternate life type dream sequence, you just want to sink your teeth into that a little more.
Production value wise, you're not wrong. And I saw that as more of an episode about Tony and Angela and their ongoing way of falling in love or trying to figure out what their relationship is. So I think that if we were more involved in their relationship and what's happening with them, it would have been a big deal to see Angela show up to spend a week in the city with him. And it would have been a big deal for them to sit down and have a conversation, even in dream, about their relationship. And it would have been a big deal to have that last conversation about like, who are we to each other, but not really, but do we want that? And do you want this? And what do we really want? I think that would have been a kind of a big step in their, tension rising throughout the series.
Yeah. And definitely if you're talking about a show don't tell approach to the idea of her appreciating his, like we said before, his sort of relatively modern, sort of casually progressive attitude, they absolutely hit that home, where you have the dream where she's saying, what if I went and had a job, and he disapproves of that, and then she wakes up to a real life version of him that completely accepts their, wild and crazy situation where the wife has a job or where the woman has a job. But yeah, you're right. On the human side, it does a great job of establishing that. If I'm coming to it from the perspective of I want a crazy, tropey dream sequence,
That's not
it
what you're
doesn't
gonna
deliver.
get. Yeah.
All right. That about does it for the dreams. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, get out your PJs and your pillowcases because it's time for a slumber party. We're going to watch Full House Season 4, Episode 4, Slumber Party. That 70s Show, Season 5, Episode 13, Your Time Is Gonna Come. Then we'll watch The Big Bang Theory, Season 4, Episode 8, The 21-Second Excitation. And finally, Bob's Burgers, Season 4, Episode 9, Slumber Party.
Yep, that's next week. And until then, we will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.